Welcome back to the second episode of How to Swing. I'm Emma, aka Ukulele Woodshed, and in this episode we're going to be looking at using those closed chord shapes that we saw in the previous episode and putting them to use, thinking about left hand muting and swing rhythm. So let's start with recapping on some of those chord shapes that we saw last time. Okay, so if you remember, in the last video we looked at some closed position chords and their positions all over the fretboard. We saw these shapes can be moved all over the fretboard to create the same chord types in different keys. So let's quickly recap on some of the shapes that we saw. So let's look at three major chord shapes to begin with. If you remember, instead of our C chord, we have this C chord, or like this. We saw this shape, in this case it would be a D chord, it can be moved up. And we saw this shape, in this case it's a G chord. I'd also like to show you a couple of minor chord shapes. They're going to come in handy for the song we're going to learn in tutorial 3. So for example, instead of a C minor like this, we can do a C minor with a bar here and a finger on the 5th fret, or this finger, and that can be moved up the fretboard as well. We also looked at various 7th chord shapes. So if you remember, we saw this 7th chord, in this case it's an F7 that can be moved up the fretboard. Here we'd have a G7, for example. We looked at this 7th chord shape. In this case we've got an A7. If we move it up here, for example, we've got a C7. We looked at our familiar D7 chord shape, which can be moved up the fretboard. Here, for example, we've got another G7. And we also looked at this shape, which in this case is our B7. If we move it up to here, we've got another D7. Okay, and I'd also like to show you a couple of different minor 7th chord shapes that we're going to use. You might be familiar. So for example, we've got a D7, a D minor here. If we add this little finger here, we've got a D minor 7. So that can be moved up the fretboard as well. There's other ways to make minor 7 shapes that we're going to see as well in the song that we're going to learn. So for example, you can bar straight across the fretboard. On the 5th fret here, for example, it's a D minor 7. This would be the D minor. So D minor 7. And then we can also make this shape. On the 5th fret here, for example, is an A minor 7, which is the same as our open string A minor 7 or a C6. Okay, so there's some new chords there for you as well. So we're going to be using these shapes in the exercises in this tutorial and also putting them into the context of a song in the next tutorial. So why am I insisting on using closed chords? Well, these are going to be super useful to us now for playing rhythm ukulele. So basically what we're going to do is fulfill the role of rhythm guitar in swing music. Now, the rhythm guitar supplied a steady beat along with harmonic information for the rest of the band, so for horn players, etc., to solo over. So swing is essentially dance music, and as such the dancers need a steady rhythm to follow. And if you aren't sure what that sounds like, listen to Freddie Green in the Count Basie Band, for example. He's a classic. I'll link to some songs in the description below. So by having all of our strings covered, it allows us to do left-handed muting, which adds a punchy and steady rhythm to our playing. So in order to do this, let's try with a D7 here. I'm going to lift up my fretting fingers to shorten the length of time that the chord rings out. So I'm sort of going to be doing this, squeezing and unsqueezing. So for example, I'll play the chord and I'll shorten it. Instead of holding down and letting the chord ring out, I'm going to play the chord and lift up my fingers without, not completely lifting them off the strings, but lifting them up a little bit so that the strings become muted. So we get this kind of sound. See what I mean? So in swing music from the 30s and 40s, rhythm guitarists like Freddie Green didn't use patterns, they usually played steady quarter notes like this, which in drumming is often called 4 on the floor due to this steady drum bass beat. So unlike a lot of music, modern music now, that usually has an accent on the 2 and the 4 or the backbeat, so like this, you can hear the accented 2 and 4, which sounds great, it sounds fine, but swing guitarists of the early swing era usually accented all 4 beats, or maybe just a little bit more on the 1. So listen to how I play this and see if you can tell the difference. You see what I mean? It's steady quarter notes. Try it for yourself and see how you get on with the muting. And a quick tip for bar chords: if you're struggling to get your bar chord a clean sound from your bar chords, or you're getting any fret buzz, try to, I don't know if you can see, but try to sort of bring your finger as close as you can to the fret without covering the fret with your finger. But sort of, I tend to turn my finger slightly around like this and bring it down, or now, bring it down right next to the fret. And that might help. Also, if you're still having problems, you can try to bring your finger a bit further along. So you're using this sort of fatter part of your finger here to create the bar chord rather than the tips of your fingers, like this. Let's try a simple, very common 6-2-5-1 chord progression together, and bringing together all of this, everything that we've seen in this tutorial so far. So the different chord shapes we've seen, and the left hand muting. So we're going to start with a closed C chord shape. I'm going to play it like this. We're going to do that for 2 beats. Then we're going to do this chord shape, the A minor 7 chord shape. We're going to do that for 2 beats. Then we're going to do a straight bar across the 5th fret for a D minor 7 for 2 beats. And then a G7 shape for 2 beats. So it's going to sound like this. Okay, now you try. You can also play it like this. Okay, so that's a really nice intro or a turnaround that can be used in many jazz songs. For example, All of Me. All of me. Okay, so that's it for tutorial 2. I hope you found it useful. Keep practicing that left hand muting until you have it right. Think about your rhythm and think about some of those new chord shapes we've seen. And we're going to put it all together in a song in tutorial 3. See you then.